Number 12 in literary criticism. I am Fawzi Slisli, and today I will be talking to you about post-structuralism and deconstruction. Post-structuralism and deconstruction. Sometimes they are called postmodernism. All these three terms, post-structuralism, postmodernism, or deconstruction, usually refer to the same type of theories, the same type of critics. For example, the French philosopher Jacques Derrida sometimes is called a post-structuralist, sometimes he's called a postmodernist, sometimes he's called a deconstruction critic. So today I will give you a brief introduction about the main ideas that they worked on, about the main assumptions that they have, and about the main principles that organize their work. Definition first. Post-structuralism is a broad historical description. It's not a precise scientific definition. It's a broad label. It's a broad historical description of intellectual developments in continental philosophy and critical theory. So it's development in continental philosophy in Europe and in critical theory. Post-structuralism is an outcome of 20th century French philosophy. It's mostly French philosophy of the 20th century that contributed to the emergence of post-structuralism. The prefix post means practically that post-structuralism is critical of structuralism. It is, in a way, a rebellion against structuralism. Why is that? Because structuralism tried to deal with meaning as complex structures that are culturally independent. As we've seen with Greimas and Gérard Genette, structuralism simply tries to extract the deep structure of a work. And they think that these deep structures are culturally and historically independent from culture and history. That language can function independent of history and culture. Well, post-structuralism disagrees with that, and they see culture and history as an integral part to meaning. We don't make meaning, we don't signify independent of culture and history. We signify and make meaning in the middle of the hustle and bustle of culture and society. So, in that sense, post-structuralism was a rebellion against structuralism. It was a critical and comprehensive response to the basic assumptions of structuralism. Post-structuralism studies the underlying structures inherent in cultural products, such as texts, but they also study all cultural products, whether they're images, advertisements, discourse of any sort, politics, covers of magazines, anything. For example, take a study, for example, of advertisements that a company makes. Every now and then, a company X, would publish leaflets with a photo of their staff, right? Their workers, their staff. And there is a 20 or 25 of them. They all look clean, nicely dressed, with nice smiles. They all look professional. And post-structuralism would study a picture like that, not looking for what's in it, but rather looking for what's not in it, what's missing from it, right? For example, why aren't there any black people? If the company is American, for example, why aren't there any black people of the picture? How many women are in the picture? What's missing, right? So they study texts, mostly looking for what's not said, what's mute, what's there but it's not said, what's implied but not said, right? They try to make the gaps in the text speak, right? So Post-structuralism, in that sense, studies the underlying structures inherent in cultural products. It uses analytical concepts from linguistics, from psychology, from anthropology, from psychoanalysis, from history, from sociology, from anything, any field, whatever is useful to make the text speak, then they will use it. To understand a text, post-structuralism studies first the text itself, and second, the systems of knowledge which interacted and came into play to produce the text, right? Because a text is a product of cultural and historical forces that come into play in the person of the writer or the author and produce the text for us. Well, for the post-structuralists, it's not the author that's important, but it's the cultural, historical, political forces that came into play and interacted and produced through the author this text. By reconstructing those forces, the post-structuralism tries to put the text in its institutional framework. What's the institutions that helped produce this text? Post-structuralism, in that sense, is a study of how knowledge is produced. How is knowledge produced? An analysis of the social, cultural, and historical systems that interact with each other to produce a specific cultural product. For example, a text of literature, for example, or a specific set of images, or a type, a style of painting, or a style of architecture. What institutional forces interact and come into play to produce this cultural form? Post-structuralism has a few basic assumptions. For example, the concept of the self, like we've seen with the concept of the author, there are some concepts that we assume, we think they're so natural and so undisputable, like the concept of the self. We think it's easy, it's simple, it doesn't need any explanation. Well, for post-structuralists, the concept of the self is not easy and it's not simple. It's not even coherent. There is no such thing as a coherent self for them. The self is a complex interaction. It's, first of all, a fictional product, an illusion. The self, what we call the self, can only manifest itself through language, through representation, right? Without language, who can prove their existence? You can prove your existence through speech, through symbols, through documents. You have a passport, you have a driver's license, you have, who are you? And someone asks you, who are you? You say, I am, and you give a linguistic definition. Someone says, well, how do I know you are a teacher in this school? What do? You get a document. So the self is a product of language. It's a construct. It's a product of representation and construct and language. And in that sense, it's a fiction. It's a narrative. It's an illusion. This is from a post-structuralist perspective. The same thing for the concept of the individual. For post-structuralism, it is not a coherent and whole entity. The individual is a mass of conflicting tensions, plus what they call knowledge claims. Knowledge claims is basically the age of a person, their gender, their class, their profession, and so on. These are their knowledge claims, right? So the individual is a complex entity. It's a mass of conflicting tensions plus knowledge claims. To properly study a text, the reader must understand how the work is related to his own personal concept of self, right? How do I, as a reader, how am I conditioned to read the text in specific ways? For example, I pay attention to the author, who he is, where he comes from. I look for authorial intentions. I try to explain the genius of the author. I pay attention to this type of actions. I don't pay attention to this type of language, to this type of the... So the reader must understand, for post-structuralism, must understand how the work is related to his own personal concept of self, right? And how the various concepts of self that form in the text come about and interact. The same thing for the text. The text has characters and representations of selves, right? Multiple selves. And those selves are not coherent wholes, but they are also a mass of tensions, plus knowledge claims, contradictions, conflicts, and so on. Also, post-structuralism is very strong about self-perception. Post-structuralism requires a critical attitude to one's assumptions, right? Limitations and general knowledge claims, right? A critic is not somebody who is sitting in, thin air. A critic doesn't come out of nowhere. A critic comes from a nation, from a race, from a class, from a specific profession. And in that sense, the critic will bring with him or her their own assumptions, maybe their own prejudices, maybe their own. And a good critic for post-structuralism should be aware of those elements and take them into consideration while studying or analyzing texts. Also, post-structuralism doesn't have much time for authorial intentions, like the formalists and the structuralists in this sense. The meaning that the author intends to transmit in a piece of literature is secondary to the meaning that the reader can generate from the text. Because if you are an author and you write a novel and you say, I want to transmit this message, well, that message is inside you as a bunch of signs, right? And you can only translate them through words. And those words need to be understood by the reader through synonyms and words. And you end up in a complex system of signification where, in the end, the intentions can be completely lost. So the authorial intentions are secondary to the meaning that the reader can extract from the text. The reader is more important than the author. Post-structuralism also rejects the idea of a literary text having one purpose. A literary text doesn't have one purpose, or one meaning, or one singular existence. Think, for example, of Shakespeare writing Hamlet. Whatever he intended, whatever message he intended to transmit through Hamlet, today it's completely lost. Today we make our own messages and meanings and understand our own meanings from Hamlet that are far, far away, most likely, from anything that Shakespeare himself wanted to convey through the play. To utilize a variety of perspectives to create a multifaceted or conflicting interpretation of a text. This is what post-structuralism tries to do. They try to use a variety of perspectives to create a multifaceted or even a conflicting interpretation of a text. Post-structuralism they like multiplicity of readings, multiple readings, even if they are contradictory to each other. To analyze how the meanings of a text shift in relation to certain variables, usually the identity of the reader. Post-structuralism also is interested in destabilizing meaning. They say that the biggest lesson they want to transmit is that meaning is unstable. So unstable that some philosophers say that it's a miracle that communication happens between people when people speak. There is so many things that prevent that linguistic message from going through, that it's a miracle that we understand each other at all. So post-structuralism displaces the writer and author and make the reader the primary subject of inquiry. They call such displacement, they displace the author and writer and put the reader in the center. They call this the destabilizing or the decentering. The author and writer was in the center, they decenter the author. They also disregard essentialist readings of the content that look for superficial readings or storylines. You know, the traditional interpretations of a text that come and tell you, well, look, this story is about A, B, C, D. Well, that's the most superficial reading. So post-structuralism disregards that and goes to try to dig out more structures of signification within the text. Post-structuralism also investigates other sources for meaning like, for example, the readers, cultural norms, other literatures, and so on. They look for meanings in places that people did not look for meaning in the past before. Such alternative sources, they don't promise consistency, they're not consistent, but they might provide valuable clues and shed lights on unusual corners of the text. Post-structuralism and deconstruction also reject that there is a consistent structure to texts, because the structures of the texts can also change with time. I'll give you an example. If two people are sitting, say, in the Stone Age, 2 million years ago, they're sitting in a cave and they write a symbol on the wall. So when they come, it's winter and they're going to travel. When they come back next year, they want to recognize this cave, that it's, you know, they were here last year. So they leave a symbol on the wall and they go. Now fast forward 2 million years later, until today. Some scientists go to this mountain and discover this cave and see the sign that those people wrote 2 million years ago. Do you think that sign will stop signifying? It will not. The scientist will study it and try to extract some meaning in it. So the structures of meaning in a text themselves change with time, with history, with culture, with context, and so on. The same text means different things from one era to another, from one person to another. The only way to properly understand these meanings, deconstruct the assumptions and knowledge systems which produce the illusion of singular meaning. So deconstruct the assumptions and the knowledge systems that produce the illusion of a single meaning. Traditional criticism gives us the illusion that a text has a single meaning. Post-structuralism and deconstruction try to destroy that. And once you destroy that illusion that there is a single meaning, we discover multiplicity of meanings. That's essentially the work of post-structuralism. These are some basic ideas and assumptions that post-structuralism has been holding and diffusing and discussing for the last 30 years. Inshallah, we will have a chance to look more closely at some of their thinkers, maybe Jacques Derrida in the next session, and I hope this will be useful to you. And with this we come to the end of this session. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa ta'ala wa barakatuh. عندك 12 في 12